So the last speaker was not the last speaker. There was somebody still from civil society. I won't take too much time. I really want to be brief because I think that the discussion is more important and maybe more interesting. But there are 2 points I really would like to make. One of the things is that I sometimes think we have to change the narrative when we talk about civil society. And actually, when I have been talking about what civil society is, then I like to think that civil society is not just associations, foundations, or these institutions that could serve as intermediaries. I like to think that if we talk about civil society, then civil society actually is the way we interact, how we talk to each other. Civil society is all about inclusion, it's about participation, and it's the way of living, it's the way of the society, how it's developed. So I think that sometimes we need to think about civil society not just being these small units. The other point I want to make is that I think that the potential that actually is in social relations and civil society and communities is underused and underestimated. We talk a lot about what could be done and what is the role of civil society. But do we do enough to empower these relations and really take this into use when we want to have a social change? So if we come back now to the concept of social capital, that was actually very nicely brought out in the first presentation. Thank you for that. I think that if we really want to be rich as a society, and if we want that our people cooperate, that they have good relations in between each other, that they trust each other, and that this kind of capital of trust and cooperation raises, then we have to work about it. It doesn't just come from the heaven or it's not just there, but we really have to invest in it in the way we do invest in raising other capitals. The other thing is that maybe connected with the concept of civil society or how we think about civil society. Very often we talk about civil society as taking the role of the intermediary or a project implementer or doing something. But actually, I think that civil society is not about single organizations, it's not about single projects, and it's more about how people interact. I was just thinking about the issue of language and the issue of schools that was brought out, and then I was thinking that my youngest child just went to a community school. This is a school where where children from the families where the Estonian language is used are studying together with the children from the families who use Russian language in their families. They do study together. They have really integrated classes. It means that my child, who doesn't know Russian language, she actually has some classes in Russian language. And how this project can happen is just because the members of the community believe that this is something that could actually benefit to the society. So this is why I think that the diversity needs to be experienced by the communities. And in order for the communities to try out these different ways, they need to be empowered so that they come up with these new ideas and they understand that, well, we want to have this extra value in the society. We want to try out new methods. And if we try and these really do work, then we can be the messengers for maybe larger policy making. So I think that these were the aspects that I just described, which maybe sometimes describe why we don't succeed with many of our programs where we want to involve civil society and we want to work with civil society. Maybe sometimes we don't do enough to understand or maybe to take into account the complexity that communities actually have, and also the civil society, let's say, groups that they have. Communities and organizations in civil society are not flat, homogeneous or similar. There are many differences, very many complex relations. What works with some organizations does not work with others. What works with some communities does not work with others. What worked maybe last year doesn't work anymore because it's all about people. So that's why it's more about to think about what is needed to empower the relations in between people and not just to let things go. Secondly, if we want to make changes, then all the changes, they need effort. And for every change, we need longer-term sustainability. We need structures which are often not built inside the community. And my point here is that if we want a change in the community, we want a change in the way people interact, then we need to start working with empowering these communities so that they can build in the structures needed. And changes also need leaders. That's why leaders need to be empowered. So if just to bring out some recommendations that maybe should be taken into account when thinking about how the role of civil society could be larger when we want to bring out the change in the society, then I think the first thing is we need to think about what kind of support structure we need for inclusive social networks that could be developed in the communities. Not just communities, but also how organizations, organized people work with each other. So that we can empower these organizations, so we can empower the leaders, and so we can empower the experiences that actually are gained through practical activities. We do need political support, but not just politicians talking about civil society. We really do need that they trust the way organizations and people in the community want to solve the problems. Of course, there is a need for the resources. Maybe sometimes there is a need for some political action for allowing organizations and communities to collect the resources by themselves. We need infrastructure that helps to grow and develop, and trust. This trust can come with the political support, but not always. So it's a lot about not going sometimes into the conflict, or when the conflict is needed for the development, as we heard before. It's about wanting to solve the conflict. And we need a cooperation and space for mutual learning. And I think that people themselves, they want to have communities that are learning communities. And that's why we should put a lot of effort in empowering civil society structures, organizations, and communities. Otherwise, the potential that is there will be unused. Thank you.